Greetings, nerds and fellow trekkers. This is Will Polk, host of Cine Nerd Presents Blerd Trek, and with me today is, I'm very excited to have with us Derek Tyler Attico, who is the author of the Autobiography of Benjamin Sisko, and also host of the Solo Story podcast, as well as done many, the photographer, has done some short stories, many things that we're going to get into here tonight, here on Cine Nerd Presents Blerd Trek. So, Derek, thank you so much for joining me and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Will. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on your show. I'm happy to talk about everything that you want to talk about. We're gonna get into it. We're gonna get into Soul the Story. We're gonna talk about Autobiography of Benjamin Sisko and Star Trek and everything in between. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on. And also, just want to give a quick shout out to the Sci-Fi Sisters for introducing us. I've had a pleasure of watching you on some various Star Trek podcasts and everything, but never actually had. This is our first time actually meeting. So it's very exciting to have you here on the show and help spread the word about your awesome book and your awesome podcast, which we'll get into that this evening. But first of all, just would like for folks to know, tell us about you. I can definitely read all your wiki and your webpage and stuff as far as your bio, but I really I want our fans and fans of Star Trek to know, who is Derek Tyler Attico?
That's a good question. No one has ever put it like that before and asked like that before. I appreciate that. Thank you. And I'm really horrible. Let me say this off the bat. I'm horrible about talking about myself. But so I'm New York born and raised in New York. Lived in Harlem in the Bronx. I've been a writer certainly all of my adult life. I started writing around 16. First screenplay I wrote at 16 won an award from the Dramatists Guild of America. I've always loved science fiction, specifically Star Trek, Twilight Zone, stuff like that. And I always liked the idea of stories that entertained while giving like some kind of a message. For some reason, that just stuck in my head. Back in 2004, 2005, the Star Trek franchise, they were doing a series of anthologies that was a contest called Strange New Worlds through Pocket Books, Simon & Schuster. And the idea was that fans could just write a short story, submit it, and then if it got in, you would have a short story that would be in the Star Trek Strange New Worlds anthology. And so it was like a way to have fans connect with Star Trek and tell their stories that they had in the Star Trek universe. So I wrote one called Alpha and Omega, and it took first place in the contest. That was 2005. Come around 2016, I did it again for a Deep Space Nine short story I wrote called A Dream in a Dream, and that got in as well. And from there, I just started my career as a writer, man. And I try and write things that I think are entertaining. Sometimes I give a little bit of a message, but I really want to entertain people and just have fun with what I do. And hopefully be the kind of writer that I will enjoy the work, but also that the people will enjoy the work as well. And that's pretty much me in a nutshell, man.
Awesome. So, what is it about Star Trek? So I know that you won this contest as far as the Strange New Worlds, but what was it that got you turned on to Star Trek? We all have our entry points into Star Trek. For me, I was a kid growing up in the late 70s, early 80s. And that prior to the Next Generation, it was the old UHF or Friday night watching episodes on our local television station, and play acting amok time in the backyard. I got my first black eye. But something about your story as far as the Star Trek.
Right, I can identify with a lot of what you're talking about. For me, I was introduced to it like so many people with Star Trek. I was introduced to it through my parents, specifically my mom. And the first Star Trek I started watching was TOS, and this was going way back. It was on like Channel 11 here in New York. I think like on Saturdays or no, like 6 o'clock or 6:30, something like that. But I would watch it, and I just really identified with it. It was cool, but for me as a kid, like I think I like 5, 6 years old watching my first Star Trek episode, Devil in the Dark. And I remember that a lot of the things that my grandmom was teaching me, a lot of the values, that's the first time I remember seeing the values that I was being taught on screen someplace,
Mm-hmm.
And he was this community of people working together, all different colors, and everybody was in that bridge, everybody was working together, and it was very positive. And I just remember identifying with that like immediately,
Mm-hmm.
and that sucked me in, right? So then, I watched TOS, and then when Next Gen came around, to be really honest, I wasn't that fond of Next Gen. Like the first season, I really didn't like it. I kind of turned off to it. It didn't really speak to me like TOS did. But then I watched it. I watched it on and off, but I wasn't consistent with it. And then for the short story, a friend of mine said, "Hey, this is a short story. Maybe you should write a Star Trek short story." So I started doing my research, and so I started watching all of Next Gen. And when it first came out and stuff, I never really got past like the first season.
Mm-hmm.
But when I started watching it all, I was like, oh wow, this is just like TOS. Roddenberry's doing the same thing, but he's doing it differently. And I really started to identify with the characters, with Data, with Geordi, with Worf, with Picard, and I really fell in love with Next Gen. And so by the time Deep Space Nine rolled around, I was all in, man.
Yeah.
I was ready to go. And I think if you want to talk about these specific ideals, there's 4 things that I have come to call the foundational pillars of Star Trek, and that is science,
Mm-hmm.
exploration, friendship, and hope.
Mm.
And you will find those
Yeah.
4 elements in everything that's Star Trek. And I think that's why it has such a mass appeal and why so many people like it, because it doesn't matter what part of the world you're from or what economic status, everybody can identify with friendship, science, exploration, and hope, or at
Yeah.
least the majority of those, and
Yeah.
those were the core elements that I took from Star Trek, and that's how I fell in love with it.
That's I've never really heard anyone articulate it that way. You always, you have the year, I call it a yearbook answer, as far as the seeing the future as where people of different races and things are working together, and so many other more popular things you hear. But I've never heard someone break it down into 4 elements like that, and that's really, you really hit up on the core of I think what makes Star Trek work. Even the newer iterations as well.
Right.
I think even though it's not necessarily, I know people have their concern, their a lot of the old guard don't connect as much with some of the new shows on, I guess they call it New Trek, but I think I think those elements are still present there. Speaking of DS9, were you a DS9er from the premiere, or what, or did you come to the show later?
No, from day one, man. From
Yeah.
that first premiere, which blew me away, right?
Oh, me too.
Right, because it was
Yeah.
not like anything we'd seen before in Star
Yep.
Trek. It
Yep.
started with the crawl on the
Mm-hmm.
screen,
Yep.
and then after the crawl, it's black, and you hear, I believe you hear uh, Picard as Locutus
Yep.
say, "Resistance is futile," And
Yep.
I'm like, what is happening here?
Yeah.
What is going on? And it just started like that, and it just grabbed me.
Yeah.
It
Well,
was,
same.
it's just a
Same.
powerful. I think it's the best pilot of any Star Trek show,
Mhm.
hands down. That's just my opinion. Um, whenever you can describe linear time through baseball, that's
Yeah,
really good writing, man. You know,
that is. That is.
it really
Yeah.
is. And
So-
the acting was phenomenal. You know, Mr. Avery Brooks as Benjamin Sisko, losing his friends, his family, his wife in like the first 3 minutes of the episode.
yeah.
It's you know, and it's an incredible, even that, just that first episode is an incredible story of all those
Mhm.
elements I'm talking about. You know, hope, friendship, science, and exploration. It's
Yeah.
all there in that first episode. So yeah.
I hear you. I hear you. Yeah. Speaking of those first 3 minutes, I remember January of 1993, a
Right.
freshman, in a dormitory, watching it in my RA. We were sitting there watching it together, and when Avery Brooks, when Cisco pops up on the screen, we literally like jumped up and we were like high fiving across the room, seeing the black captain, well, commander, of course, at that point, Lieutenant Commander Cisco. But it was, just it was that moment. We always we had a hoorah, but just to have a African American lead, uh, to be in command of that, the lead of that show, and just really setting the tone, and like you said, just really seeing the arc of him
Yeah.
with all the four elements that you described. Really was something special, especially when you
Yeah.
consider the time. It was in the early 90s.
Yeah.
Speaking of being a African American, nerd, blerd, we love, it's like this. I love calling ourselves. That's the name of the show. But for you as a black writer, what does it mean to you? Given that we're talking about first, as far as I know you're not the first black writer for Star Trek, but to really, and I want to segue a little bit into the book that you've written about Benjamin Sisko. What did it does it mean to you, not only to be a contributor, to provide that voice as a African American author for a American character in one of the biggest sci-fi franchises ever produced,
Right.
and
Wow.
also some of your other contributions that you've made in the Star Trek universe and sci-fi in general.
Great question. Well, I should say I am the only person of color to have written for and about Star Trek in 4 different mediums. So I've written Star Trek stories as a short story. I've written for Star Trek in Star Trek Adventures, the role playing game. I've written for Star Trek and about Star Trek with Star Trek Magazine, and now I've written long form, the novel, the autobiography of Benjamin Sisko. I'm the only person of color to have done that in almost 60 years of the franchise.
Wow.
So that's a big
Wow.
deal, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Um, it's a big deal, and it's something that I don't take lightly. Uh, uh, I never thought about it, until I started to realize. I'm like, wait a minute, I've written now in these different mediums. Writing the autobiography of Benjamin Sisko was honestly something I thought would never happen, and then it came my way. I mean, I always thought about it, and I remember when the autobiographies came out. There was the first one was, I believe the first one was Kirk, and then it was Picard, and then it got skipped. Cisco's got skipped, and they did Janeway, and I was like, oh, I hope somebody does an autobiography of Sisko, and how would I do it? And I started to think about how I would do it if I ever had a chance. But I'm like, that's never going to happen. And then it's wild. Like I said, in 2016, I wrote a short story, Deep Space Nine short story called A Dream in a Dream, and Titan Books got wind of that, read that story, and thought I would be a good fit for writing the autobiography. And then I had a great discussion with the editor at Titan, George Sanderson, and he liked my ideas for bringing the autobiography to life and to tell it in Sisko's voice, even though he's in the wormhole, telling it in his voice, because all the other captains, it was in their voice, and Titan felt that Sisko couldn't be written in his voice because he was in the wormhole. So they wanted to break with that and do it through Jake.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, that's a great idea, but I think we should stick with everything that's been done before with Titan because you've done such phenomenal work. We can still do this in Sisko's voice. It's just that he's in the wormhole, but he's sending a message to Jake. And the message he's sending Jake is about his life, about his own life. But in talking about his own life to his son, it becomes autobiographical, So it's a father's message to his son. And in doing that, I felt this is something that I wanted to have mass appeal for everyone to be able to resonate with those 4 pillars that I keep talking about. But on top of that, to be honest, I really wanted the Black community to be able to see themselves in the autobiography because I felt that was necessary. And I felt that in doing so, I wasn't really doing anything new. All I was doing was honoring what the writers of Deep Space Nine and specifically Mr. Avery Brooks intended with Sisko was for people, for kids of color, of all people, but specifically I think kids of color and young boys of color to see themselves in the future, to see themselves embodied through Ben Sisko, So I kept all that in mind and tried to push that forward. So it's a story about family. It's a story about a Black family, but it's also a story about family. I've had people tell me all different ethnicities are like, yeah, this is like what my family was like, what my dad was like, or what my little sister was like, And I'm just really thankful that I did a good job, and that is resonating with people, man.
Yeah, that's really true. And I know I've been reading the book, and and not want to spoil anything for folks who haven't read the book, but that story of family is very resonant. And we see the narrative of his early life and some of the descriptions of his growing up in New Orleans and everything else. And I really like the way that you took elements from the show and like wove it into the story. So if you're a fan of DS9, you're seeing those elements of things that we were introduced to this about this character through the 7 years that the series was on. When would walk me through the process of writing this story as far as a couple of levels, and I have a few questions about it. You shared how you were approached to do the book, but what was the process as far as writing a book? I've never written a book before. I mean, in my day job, I do writing all the time from a legal standpoint because I'm a lawyer, but but as far as like the creative process of writing a work of fiction like this,
Right.
walk the listener, people who are watching this video, how did it go about? How long did it take you to actually write the book? And I would really enjoy hearing about that process.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is not just like as hard as writing a novel is, because this is also my first novel, which is nuts. I still wrap my head around that. But as hard as writing a novel is, imagine you're writing your first novel, but it's also for a franchise that's also one of the largest science fiction franchises in existence in the world. So no pressure, right?
Yeah,
So
no, not at all, not at all.
no, not at all, right? Not at all. So in writing for intellectual property like Star Trek, at least the way that CBS, Paramount, and Titan did it, and the way that they do it is you don't just start writing. You first have to write an outline. Well, first you get invited. You don't tell them, you get invited. You have a discussion, and they feel you're a good fit. And I passed those tests, those hurdles, right? And so then the next thing then was to have to write an outline that what was going to be in the book, because they needed to know what it would look like from literal chapter to chapter, or almost page to page, what it would look like. And I had never done. I always outline everything I do, but I had never done an outline for a novel before. So very quickly I realized, oh wow, I can't. If I'm planning this, I have to put every single thing that I want in this outline, because once that outline is approved by Paramount CBS, then I'm locked in.
Mm-hmm.
I can't come up with something while I'm writing and be like, oh, I want to change. You know, I mean, you know, you can, to some degree, you can give yourself some kind of leeway, but you can't change things dramatically from the outline. So I took my time with the outline. It took about 3 weeks to write the outline. As I recall, the outline was about, I think, 15, 20 pages. And I really broke it down, you know, from the introduction to the first chapter. You know, the story starts 3 different times, which is something that I've never done before, but I felt it was necessary. It starts on Deep Space Nine without giving a lot away. Then there's an introduction by Jake, and so that's the second way it starts. And then the third way it starts is from Ben Sisko speaking. So the story actually starts 3 different times and ends twice. And I knew that was a little bit bold to do, but I was like, you know what? I'm going to try something different. I'm going to challenge myself. And I wrote that outline. And in the outline, I would put like actual dialogue for some of the things that I wanted to really highlight. And I, you know, I didn't surprise anyone at all. I said, you know, I'm going to talk about race. I'm going to talk about New Orleans. I'm going to talk about in the Star Trek universe, World War III in the Star Trek universe. I'm gonna talk about these things because I think this is an opportunity to cover a lot of what's happening on Earth that we really don't see on Star Trek, because we always see Star Trek usually from the Federation and Starfleet point of view. Deep Space Nine, we got to pull back and we got to see from other species, but we really don't see a lot about what's happening to the everyday person on Earth. And so I thought this was an opportunity to do a lot of that. And so I put a lot of that in, and I don't just cover Deep Space Nine. I cover all the series are covered in the book. Even Strange New Worlds. I talk about Pike. And I even have a thing with Lower Decks in there. So I got a little bit of everything in there. And it took me about, I think, 6 months to write about that.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
Cool. So when in writing this, and you reference many things, I would imagine it would have to get approved by Paramount for, and because of course they own the IP. But I can imagine you probably watched hours and rewatched hours of DS9 and really capturing Avery's, the voice of not only Avery Brooks and what he brought to the character, but also just the character itself.
Right.
And I know just from prior, I know you mentioned, I think I was watching another interview that you had the opportunity to meet Mr. Brooks before. So one, tell us about that meeting for people who haven't heard that story. One,
yeah.
But two, the second part of that is, in finding Sisko's voice, were you able to talk to folks who were in the writers' room to help you get some of their impressions and thoughts as far as what made this character tick, and
right.
then putting it to your words as far as writing his autobiography?
Right. Those are great questions. I'll tell you the story. Let me tell you the story first about meeting Avery Brooks. I mean, I've seen him like once, I think, at a convention, but I actually met him, had to be like 96, around 96, 97. And, oh, you know what? Yeah, it had to be around then. 'Cause it was like right after Deep Space Nine. And I started in writing in regards to film, and I have my mentor, Alonzo Spite, is an independent filmmaker. And I was with him in Harlem. He took me to a restaurant in Harlem, and I can't remember the name of the restaurant now. But we were going into the restaurant, and who was coming out but Avery Brooks? And it was nuts, and it was just like right there. It was like one of those things where I just walked up right in front of him, and I could just feel the man's energy was palpable, And so I shook his hand. I sat at his hand. He was gracious, shook my hand. I just asked him, I said, what was it like directing Far Beyond the Stars? And I told him, I thanked him for his work. And he looked at me and he said, necessary, and then he left.
Wow.
So that's my Avery Brooks story.
But you can spend unnecessary, like so many ways,
So right.
especially when you consider what was about, what Far Beyond the Stars was about.
Was
And
about exactly.
yeah, and you know that's a very powerful story. And another episode, I don't know if this one influenced your writing a lot too. I was thinking about, I can't remember the title episode right now, but it was either the sixth or seventh season whenever they were I guess the seventh season because Cassidy was already out of the brig and everything. When in Vic's Casino, and Sisko was very reluctant to go because the time period that it was that was based in.
Right.
That episode, I mean, I know Far Beyond Stars is one that everybody points to as far as an example of racism, really, and play how all that plays in Star Trek, and that time period when Benny was the writer at that magazine. But that other episode really sticks out to me as well because that was, in the 24th century, Cisco's like, no, people who look like us, Cassidy, can't go in a place like that.
Right.
How did that influence? Did that episode influence some of your writing of the story?
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
It did. And I just want to really quick, I'll go back and answer your other questions. I never spoke to anyone on Star Trek or about anything I was doing other than the outline.
Mm.
And after I did the outline, it was approved I think like a week later or less than a week later, after I finished writing it. And I never spoke to Mr. Brooks or anyone on the show or anything about like that. And getting his voice down, I did go to like earlier stuff he'd done, like Spencer for Hire, Man Called Hawk, to try and get a younger Ben Sisko, the voice of the younger Ben Sisko. And I immediately realized that I couldn't because he's such a good actor. Everything he did in Spencer, everything he did in Hawk, he's doing none of that for Sisko. Right. Sisko is a totally separate character from those other characters. So I was like, oh man. So I realized it was going to have to come from me, but I had to get his voice, So and I really didn't watch a lot of Star Trek or anything. What I did is the episode, why am I blanking on the, like, In the Pale Moonlight,
Yeah.
which is really written and shot like a theatrical play, right? I watched that 3 times back to back to get his voice. Mm-hmm. And then I didn't watch another episode of Star Trek or anything until I finished the book. Once I had his voice, and I also had his voice from the short story I did in 2016. So once I had it, I wrote it. Now, you're right. Benny had that idea about not going into 1950s casino. Benjamin had that idea about not going into a 1950s casino because of how people of color were treated in the 50s, And even though it was the 24th century, he had those ideas and feelings. And so I said to myself, well, where is that coming from? I understand it's coming from Avery Brooks, but for the character, Ben Sisko, where is that coming from in the 24th century where racism is not a thing?
Right.
It's not a thing. So that was a little bit of a challenge, but I realized that my answer to that question lied not in Ben, but in his father, Joseph. And his father on the show is a lot of people of color can recognize their parents or grandparents in Joseph. Totally. He doesn't like replicators. He doesn't like transport. He doesn't like all these things. So I started to think about, like, well, why doesn't he like these things? Why does he want to do these things? And in the book, he and his son, young Ben Sisko, they kind of have it out. And Joseph explains to him, America in the 20th, 21st century, even elements of 22nd century, was not the best place for people of color. For Black people, and it wasn't until after World War III happens in the Star Trek universe that did humanity as a whole wake up and realize they had been really stupid and ignorant to a lot of things. And Joseph's mindset was that he didn't want anyone in the Sisko family to lose those ideals and to lose the history and culture from New Orleans. So no one in the Sisko family had really gone to space, Right. And he was really reluctant to let Ben go. And Ben tells him, well, I have to go because I'm not going to lose those things. I'm going to take those things with me.
Right.
You
And
know, and
and we see those things. I mean,
and
he's
we
very
right,
proud of his culture. I mean,
right.
whatever. Yeah, I think the third season premiere where when Jake, whenever they're moving,
They're moving
Ben
in,
brought all the
right?
stuff. They're moving in. Ben brought all the stuff out of storage when they went back to Earth to get the Defiant, and he's singing up the the African art, and
Yep,
really,
yep.
so his culture, and I think that really shows that you're right. I mean, even though those conditions are, at least as far as on United Earth, racism is
Yeah.
not a thing. But but he still has that cultural identity, and I see we see other characters too in Star Trek. I mean, you think about Chakotay and his
Right.
origins and other things too. So I think I think that was another great thing about with Star Trek as well, is showing how um, even in a society that's almost a utopia like the Federation, people still hold on to their traditions, and you
Right.
don't have to become I guess monochrome in your person.
Absolutely. Those things don't get lost in favor of technology or in
Hmm.
favor of new things in the future. Those things are actually embraced and cherished, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and so, and that allowed me to explain why he had those feelings in that episode, Bada Bing. I think it's the name of the
Yeah,
episode, Bada Bing.
that's it. That's Bada Bing. Yep, that's the one. Yep.
Yeah, is why he felt that way. So yeah, and once I had gotten that idea from Joseph, from through his character, that allowed me to do a little bit of an autobiography for Joseph, and
Hmm.
then that allowed me to open up New Orleans and talk about New Orleans and a lot of things in the 24th century.
Cool. That's awesome. Before we pivot to other things, I know I mentioned that if you talk to any of the people from the writers' room while you were writing the book, but now that it's been out, I guess it's been out now for a little over a year.
Right.
So, have you gotten any feedback from? I know you had a great conversation. I was with a visitor. She was on your show, but we'll get into that here in a minute. But as far as any of the creative staff, as far as like RC Bear or uh, Peter Allen Wolf or Ron Moore, any of those folks, have you had any feedback from them as far as uh, uh, how one, have they read have they read the book, and two, what do you
Right.
think that you've done with Ben?
No, I haven't. I'm kind of nervous to even know. I mean, I really respect the writers of all of Star Trek,
Mm.
and specifically, of course, the writers of Deep Space Nine, because I was honored to follow them and follow their work.
Yeah.
I hope they would like it. I don't even know if they would read it, because I can understand if they haven't, because it's like, well, I was a writer on that show, and then I'm going to read, maybe they will,
Mm.
hopefully they will. If they do read it, if anyone reads it, I just hope that they see that I try to honor all that hard work and writing that they did. Now I did speak to Sirach Lofton, who read it, and he loved
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, that's great. If Jake
Yes, you
Sisko
got
likes it,
Jake.
I got Jake, I'm good. Um, I've had a few other people tell me that they've read it and they enjoyed it. Um, Celia Gooding,
Mhm.
who plays Neil to Uhura,
Mhm.
she's read it. She really enjoyed it. But no one from Deep Space Nine as of yet. I have to send a copy to Nana,
Okay.
and I hope that she enjoys it. So that's all I can hope for, is that they see some of the hard work that they did in that book.
Yeah. What has been the fan before we turn to your podcast? What's been the fan reaction that you've received over since the book's been released?
The fans have loved it. I've gotten messages from all over the world, of fans telling me how much it meant to them. One gentleman wrote a song about. He said right after he read it, he's a musician. He wrote a song. He sent me the song. Um, just incredible things. One woman wrote me and said that she watched Deep Space Nine with her father, and he passed away, and she read the book like in a night or
Mm.
2 nights, and it felt like her father was there with her when she read it. A gentleman told me that reading the book helped him to put away some feelings he had about his father's death. I talk about death and life and everything that affects the family in the book, not just the starships and the things that we know about in the future, but the family that has to stay connected in the future. And so a lot of people have liked it, and I'm just thankful that it's resonated with with most of the fans.
That's great. That's awesome. That's awesome. Um, Al, one of the reasons, thank you. Really, I enjoyed having the Star Trek conversation with you. We are, like I said, this is a Star Trek based spin-off show from our main podcast, Seen Nerd, but Seen Nerd Presents Blerd Trek. Just wanted to put the word out there. But we're here to talk about your podcast, not us. And we're turning to the soul of the story. I know you've just completed season 1. As I noted, you did have someone from the show on your podcast, the Nana Visitor, talking about her book that she's written about her experiences in Star Trek. And if folks haven't heard her talk about that, I haven't had a chance to read her book yet, but you should definitely have heard her talk about it. So, I know that was the highlight at the end of your first season, but let me walk it back a little bit and just tell me, how did you so you've done things in several different mediums now. You're a writer, both for short stories and novels. You've written stuff for magazines. You're a photographer. But what made you turn to podcasting?
Another great question, Will. I've always wanted to do a podcast, but I knew it had to be at the right time. And my thing was always, what would I be talking about? And I never just wanted to talk about writing, because I thought, wow, that's great, but I wanted something that would have a lot more appeal to not just writers, but to everyone, that anyone listening could pick something from the show that I had and get something from it, not specifically just writers. And so I was thinking about that for a long time, and then I came up with the name, which you can see here, right? Soul of the Story, right? And so on Soul of the Story, what we do is we talk about storytelling, but from individuals, established artists in different fields, painters, writers, actors like Nana Visitor, and Matthew Jennings. We just have some. I had Dayton Ward on the show. Just some really, really fantastic individuals. And so I try and talk about soul of the story, get to the soul of not only the individuals I'm interviewing, get to the soul of their story, but to talk about their craft, how they do their craft, what it takes, and ask questions that you don't always hear answers to, like what is it like to deal with fear when you're working in your craft. Nana and I talked a little bit about sexism, racism. I just don't want to just talk about craft. I want to open it up, because it's the world that influences the craft, and then hopefully the craft that influences the world. And that's how we get to the soul of the stories, by talking about all of these things for everyone, And so then when I had this initial idea of a show, I went and I approached the Sci-Fi Sisters, right? I approached them, the Sci-Fi Sisters, right? I approached them, and they were interested in branching out a little bit. And so I proposed the idea of us working together, and I would do my show under the Sci-Fi Sisters umbrella. So it's a Sci-Fi Sisters production. That's what Soul of the Story is. So it's my show under their umbrella of Sci-Fi Sisters Inc. And it has been a phenomenal team up, a phenomenal, and in some ways a marriage of thought and idea, of just all of us working together towards a common goal, whether it's about my show or it's about the actual Sci-Fi Sisters show, or we have 2 other shows. We have 2 Moons in the Microphone and Sin Cinema. These are all shows that all of us in Sci-Fi Sisters Inc. can relate to, we can
Mhm.
encourage each other, and hopefully people that watch all of us will get something from each of these shows to take in and think about and hopefully resonate with them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense, and it's awesome to have a good umbrella like that with an established group. I know I've enjoyed watching some of the Sci-Fi Sisters podcast, and they've had plenty of folks from not only from Star Trek, but from from throughout the genre as well.
Right, right,
And I know some of I know you've had multiple guests your first season. What what are some things that you've learned in your first season as far as uh, hearing from various artists from different um, mediums and spaces
right.
that you apply to any short stories or written works that you're planning or in the process of developing or writing right now.
Okay, well, the first part of that, like, what have I gotten from, I really, and this may sound weird, but I didn't know if I would learn anything from my show. I was hoping other people would, but it's kind of crazy because I don't know why I wasn't thinking I would learn stuff. I've learned so much. I've only had 4 guests from my first season, or what I'm calling my first book.
Mm,
Um, Chapter 1 was Kavita Maharaj, and what she does is she's a painter, and she
mhm,
paints beautiful, beautiful acrylic images of Star Trek, of Spock, of the Enterprise, of all corners of Star Trek, and we got into a conversation about how your life, where you live, how your parents, how all this affects you as an artist, and who you are comes out. So when we see her work, we're seeing a little bit of her soul. When we see Dayton Ward, and he's written over 20, 30 Star Trek novels at this point, and he's done stuff for 24 Marvel and everything. We're seeing a little bit of his soul,
mhm.
when he's writing. When Matt Jennings is acting, he's been on For All Mankind, and when we watch him, we're seeing a little bit of his soul. We're understanding how, and we're understanding, and the Nav visitor, of course, the Nav talked about how much Major Kira influenced her, and then of course how she, of course, influenced the character of Kira Nerys, right?
Mhm.
And so in talking to these individuals and talking about their craft, I'm trying to get to something deeper, so that's something that anyone can identify with and resonate with, whether it's something going on in their family and how that affected them and what they wrote or what they painted or whatever. But how they deal with real world issues, how they deal with fear, how they deal with sexism, racism. These are the kind of things that I want to talk about, because we go to the arts for entertainment and sometimes escapism, but at the same time, I think understanding the artists that are creating these things is important, because you should know about the souls of the individual creating all this fantastic art.
That's so true. That's so true. And one of the things I found over the years of podcasting, and maybe you've seen this not only from being the interviewer side, but now on the host side, is the community that you build with
Yes.
listeners and the audience that that takes time out of their days, and whether it's driving to work or folding laundry or whatever the situation may be. That community you build up with that, and what kind of feedback have you received from folks who have heard the amazing stories? I had watched all 4 episodes of your show, and I definitely got a lot out of it, and especially whenever you are on a podcast, I always think, I know it's a good podcast when I walk away from it with learning something new about someone that I never knew before. And it's
Wow.
and so so what kind of reactions have you gotten from your listeners, from your guests that you've had so far?
The guests have all been really gracious. They told me they've enjoyed the time we spent having these conversations. The podcast community as a whole has been really gracious and welcoming to me, which I didn't even expect, and I'm just very thankful for. I'm learning a lot as I have these discussions. I'm learning a lot about craft, and I think sometimes when you have a discussion with someone and it starts to get on a deeper level, even if they're talking about themselves, it makes you reflect and think about the things in your life, right? So I try to hold back a little bit on that because it's not about me on the show, it's about them. But like after a show is over, I'll think about those conversations. I'm like, oh wow, yeah, that's very interesting, you know. I know I've off screen, you know, I've asked each of those individuals things that they've told me, and I'm like, wow, you know, it helps me to grow as a human being. And so that's been a wonderful experience that I didn't even expect to have, man. You know, to be really honest, you know.
Yeah, totally. Um, so speaking of which, I know you have your podcast. I guess under your second season or second, I guess chapter 2, as you're calling
Yes.
it, it's coming in January.
No, actually, book 2 will
Okay.
be February 12th,
February 12th. Okay.
2025. February 12th, book 2.
Okay. I think I'm thinking about the Sci-Fi Sisters. Yeah, I think they start back up in January, maybe.
Yes, they start back up in January. The Sci-Fi Sisters start back up in January, and we'll all be there. But the Sci-Fi Sisters start up, and what's going to happen is they start first because, of course, they're the flagship, right?
Yeah.
You know, they are the Enterprise, right? And we are all the other ships behind them, right? So they start first, and then what will happen is the other shows will play out on Wednesdays after the Sci-Fi Sisters. So it'll be the 4 shows we're talking about: Sci-Fi Sisters, 2 Moons in the Microphone, Sin Cinema, and my show Soul the Story. And we'll be rotating on Wednesdays for most of the year. But my show starts February 12th.
February 12th. Great. I'll mark it on the calendar.
Yes, please do.
Yeah. So, in addition to your podcast, what other projects you got coming down the line?
I've got a few things going on. I'm working on a novel of my own, not with any franchise. I'm working on a novel, and it's a really big novel. So I'm excited about that, and hope to have that done by like the first quarter of next year. I'm actually working on 2. If I'm being really honest, I'm working on 2. So that's a lot of fun. And then January 18th, which is right around the corner, I've been invited to be a guest on Trek Talks, which is great, which is fantastic. But what's really phenomenal about this is that I've been invited to be on a panel with the other 2 authors of the autobiography books, right? So
awesome.
Una McCormick and why am I blanking on his last name? David. I can't remember David's last name. Why am I blanking on his last name? We've all been invited to talk about the autobiography books. So on this panel, we'll be asked questions about each captain that we've done. I only did Sisko, but David did Kirk and Picard, and Una did Spock and Janeway. So between the 3 of us, we've done 5 books now with 5 captains, and we're going to be able to talk about all of that on the panel. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
That's awesome. So it's going to be on Trek Talks, you said?
It's going to be on Trek Talks, and that will be on January 18th.
Okay.
Which is and I think it's going to run. I don't think it will only. I think it starts on the 18th, but it will be the Martin Luther King weekend. So I think it might be more than one day. But it's an event. Trek Talks is basically it's a telethon to benefit the Hollywood Food Coalition.
Yeah.
So
that's what is the John Billingsley?
Yes, John Billingsley, who played Dr. Phlox on Enterprise. It's basically his baby that he promotes, and it's for a phenomenal cause, a really good cause, which is feeding the homeless. you know, which I mean, the homelessness in around the world, and of course in America, is a travesty, especially in the greatest country in the world. And to be able to help out in any way, if the panel I'm on can help bring people in, and we can talk about, you know, something so critical and bring awareness to it, I'm happy to do that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, anything we can do to help promote that, we will definitely do so here on our
Thank you.
show. Because it is a dealing with that is such an important issue. So any way we can help, let us know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So in a few moments we have left here,
Yes, sir.
I know you mentioned that you're working on a couple more books and stuff. And for anybody out there who's watching or listening to us, if it's on audio, what's some advice you have for aspiring writers? You know, you've had now multiple experiences from everything from a contributor to a magazine to write a novel now. What would be some tips that you would share with them as they are pursuing that journey?
Wow. Okay. No. Again, no pressure, right?
Yeah.
I would say that the one thing I would say is to have confidence
Mm.
in what you write. I know a lot of. I also I'm currently teaching for the Task Sequential Art Academy in Dublin. I'm teaching the fundamentals of storytelling, a 12-week course for them. And what I've noticed is that in teaching writing and teaching the fundamentals of writing, if someone is new to writing, they don't always have the confidence that you need to have as a writer. And I think there are a lot of people out there in the world that want to write but feel like, oh, I can't write, I don't know how. But I think you have to start, tell yourself that you will commit to it. And even if it's a sentence or two every day, just keep at it. And I promise you, the more you keep at it, the more you will get better. And then that being said, I would tell writers to absorb as much information, read. Writing is an art form that's similar in many ways to me, like acting. You know, you can study acting, you can study how to write, but when I am really writing, when I'm really feeling like I'm in a groove, is when I'm pulling out of myself
Mm-hmm.
emotions from events that have happened in my life, or things that I've seen, or something that I want to talk about. So the more you allow yourself to express what you feel, to be authentic, it will, I promise you, come out in your writing. Now, don't let the mechanics of writing and the grammar and the, you know, how do I write prose and this or that, don't let those things stop you. Learn those things, but don't let them inhibit you from actually writing. Even if you're journaling every day, you're writing, and
Mm-hmm.
you journaling can help you free yourself up, so that when you want to write, let's say fiction, you've already have a groove going. It's just in many ways it's similar to running or working out every day. You know, it starts to become muscle memory, and the same could be said for writing. So you have to keep at it in some capacity every day, and not just talk about it or wish it. You have to actually stick with it and do it, and have confidence in yourself, I would say.
Awesome. Great advice. Great advice.
Thank you.
Derek, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, man.
As we wrap up here, tell our watchers and listeners where they can find you.
Right. I forgot to say. Okay, so you can find me at derekattico.com. You can find me Attico on Facebook, the social media formerly known as Twitter. Also, which I will not say his name. You can find me
really.
on Attico on Blue Sky, and Attico on Instagram. so you can find me in all those places. And if you see me on social media, or if you join any of those things, don't just join. Say hi to me, and I'm happy to talk to people and say hi back and answer questions and that kind of thing.
Right. And your show is premiering, you said, in February.
February 12th,
February 12th.
2025. Sold the Story. I believe at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on YouTube under the Sci-Fi Sisters umbrella of Sci-Fi Sisters Inc.
Great, great. Well, again, thank you so much for being here. Definitely want to have you back here again. Love to nerd out with you some more Star Trek stuff, but also
Yes, man.
talk more about the book and anything you want to chat about. You're always welcome here.
Thank you so much. And I'm a nerd too, so I'm happy to talk about not just Trek. I can do comics, Star Wars, all that stuff. I'm just as much a nerd as everybody else.
Yeah, I see the Lord of the Rings there right there on your bookshelf.
Oh yeah, man, I got a little bit of everything, man, back here. I mean, yeah, I got a little bit of everything back here. So yeah, Trek, Lord of the Rings, Aliens. I've got it all, here. So I'm happy to talk about those things.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for being here. Listeners, be sure to subscribe to Derek Tyler Attico and the Sci-Fi Sisters, their YouTube channel, but also be sure to check out all his work, follow him on social media, and check out all the things that he's got a pretty full calendar coming up at the beginning of 2025. So be sure to check him out on Trek Talks, and of course on Soul of the Story on the Sci-Fi Sisters YouTube channel. Thank you all for watching or listening to Scene and Nerd Presents Blerd Trek. You can always find all our podcasts on our website at www.sceneandnerdpodcast.com. Be sure to rate, subscribe, follow, and like this, and also leave a comment below. And be sure to leave a comment for both me on social and also hit up Derek's. So with that, live long and prosper.
Thank you so much.